This is a session to introduce the recent graduates from UCT who has done their postgraduate research through the Saatchi Chair for Mineral Law in Africa. The Saatchi Chair for Mineral Law in Africa focuses on what we believe are Africa's two biggest assets, minerals and people. And we have three aims. The first is to cultivate expertise by building a body of scholarship in mineral and energy law to expand research capacity on the African continent. The second aim is to facilitate growth of what we call the African Intelligentsia, graduated members of the society, and we want to do that by enabling hubs of excellence across the continent. And the third is to engage with law and policy making to promote ethical business and investment mindsets in the extractive sectors of Africa. One of the biggest contributions of the chair is in the production of highly intelligent and very well skilled researchers and people knowledgeable in the business of mineral and energy law in Africa. And today I would like to introduce you to a few of the chair's most recent graduates.
I examined the role that municipalities play to manage the relationship between land use planning and mining. So before a mining company can start its mining operations, certain authorizations are required. Some of these authorizations are quite obvious, for example, a mining right or an environmental authorization, a water use license, etc. What was not so obvious until quite recently is that the mining company must also ensure that the land is appropriately zoned by the municipality to allow for mining activities. And this was the focus of my thesis. On the one hand, I examined the considerations that a municipality must take into account to determine whether a specific piece of land should be zoned for mining purposes. And on the other hand, I examined the municipal process to rezone the land, if necessary, for the mining activities to commence. I investigated whether these different authorization processes to obtain a mining right, on the one hand, and the municipal land use authorization, on the other hand, can be merged or can at least be streamlined. And this investigation was conducted through the lens of cooperative government, which refers to the constitutional requirement that different spheres or departments of government must cooperate with one another on matters of mutual interest. And I evaluated to what extent the Department of Mineral Resources and the different municipalities are cooperating and interacting with one another when new mining operations are proposed. I also made some recommendations for how such cooperation can be improved. Thank you, Shamila, over to you.
I think that was a good point to hand over on, because I actually looked at how government departments can better cooperate with one another to ensure that environmental laws are implemented in the mining sphere. So you had all of these departments that were handling different processes and they weren't consolidated. So that's basically the problem that I identified, that the processes weren't consolidated and they needed to better cooperate. Yeah, thank you. I'll hand over to Bernard.
Following up from where Shamila is, my thesis, as you heard, was obviously on environmental law, but instead of looking at the environment as a whole, like Shamila, I zoomed into water, particularly in the mining sector. And I wanted to really examine why water sustainability was an issue, because that's what I identified when I decided to embark on the topic. And it quickly became apparent to me that the law in South Africa is not the issue, even though the law is not perfect, but I quickly identified that it wasn't an issue. So I looked into whether implementation was the issue, and that's what I found. And I eventually also go deeper, looking at how not just implementing the law, but implementing it through good governance processes. And so that's what I focus on, to say the law is already there. People are doing what they can do in terms of governance, but that governance is not good enough. So I rather looked at how they can improve it to what we call good governance. And eventually, like Louis, I made recommendations how water sustainability in the South African mining context can be better achieved through good governance processes. And I'm talking here of public participation, accountability especially, and then cooperative governance. Because like Shamila mentioned, it concerns a lot of departments, and it can only be achieved through better cooperation, which was one of my main recommendations. Yeah. And I guess, Richard, you are next. Yes.
I'm Dr. Richard Kramer. My research focused on the abandonment of land ownership in South Africa, and specifically the questions of whether it is possible to abandon land ownership in South Africa, and following on from that, whether it should be permissible to abandon land ownership in South Africa. It's my view that in South African law, it is not currently possible to abandon land ownership because there simply isn't a mechanism through which land ownership can be abandoned. There's no mechanism through which one's name can be just simply struck from a title deed, rendering a piece of land ownerless. But then I looked at the question of whether we should permit the abandonment of land ownership. And I came to the conclusion that the South African context, the unrestricted right to abandon land ownership is not viable. It would take up too much money from the public purse, but there should be a certain circumstances in which landowners should be permitted to abandon their land ownership, or at least pass ownership of their land to the state, particularly where that land has accrued a negative value, such as through mining, which is not the fault of the individual landowner. And I will hand over to Henri.
I considered the question why, despite having legislative instruments such as the Mining Charter and the Social Labour Plan, to name a few, which instruments advocate or actually mandates the empowerment and development of mining communities, why there is still the perception or the reality that mining communities are impoverished and that mining companies are not sharing the benefits of mining sufficiently with mining areas. And this is very prevalent if we look at the way in which the media depicts the relationship between mining communities and mining companies and the conflict that we have seen over the last couple of years. I took a more theoretical, critical legal approach to this issue, and I determined that by using development rhetoric and community and poverty rhetoric and legislative instruments, the legislative instrument or the implementation of the legislative instrument will actually have ideological implications. And what do I mean with that? I considered critical post-development theory. And this theory argues that whenever one uses this idea of development or tries to promote this idea of development, one is actually promoting and you could say enforcing specific worldviews and values. This enforcement action is taken onto the development beneficiaries. And the effect of this is that whenever we are drafting or creating legislative instruments, we will depict the development beneficiary and the development solution in a specific way that will not necessarily relate with the views and the values of the development beneficiary itself. And the conclusion I then drew was that the definition of community and mine community development and even ownership in instruments such as the Mining Charter are vague and inaccurate because of these ideological implications that this development paradigm has. And this will create implementation problems and will perpetuate inequality and poverty in mining. Thanks. Over to Gardner.
My thesis assessed the effectiveness of self-regulation by mining companies in three mining sectors, the platinum, coal, and the gold sector. The reason for my topic, or what motivated this research area, was simply the fact that at the moment there is this huge dysfunctional labor practices in the mining sector. And I wanted to explore whether it's possible to find alternative methods to complement the current regulatory practices. And what I found was that despite the wide usage by mining companies and the wide adoption by mining companies of various commitments, those instruments are not producing the desired outcomes, simply because from their design to the implementation and everything else, they were intended to function as regulatory instruments. Thank you, Prof. I think over to you, yes.
Thanks. Listening to you talk about your work struck me for the first time how seamlessly the one project fitted into the other, and that was not really intended to be. It wasn't contrived. This was a completely natural progression, and I must say, working for that title is some of the hardest work you will have done in your life. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about this process of postgraduate study and what it felt like for you. Perhaps we should start at the beginning. As Julie Andrews used to say, it's a very good place to start.
I came to UCity with this feeling that I'm going to write this masterpiece that would change the world.
When I started when I started my postgrad studies, I think it was a very difficult process because I didn't really have a clear-cut topic.
A lot of people start the PhD journey with grand plans, and ultimately at the end of the day, you're going to have to whittle that grand plan down to something a lot smaller and choose a particular path to go down.
It's something that many people have highlighted already. Discovering that topic you want to work at is so broad, and then also only getting to discover what PhD actually requires me to do when I started. So that was a big challenge on its own to settle in, to understand what a PhD is all about.
The benefit of, for instance, this orientation that I attended was the fact that there was an emphasis on problematizing the focus area. So you need to find a problem, which, I mean, sounds easy from the outset, but it took me quite a few months to kind of like read a lot of articles, read a lot of books, talk to a lot of people to kind of actually see whether this was a feasible study.
You don't be surprised when, say, after the first draft of your proposal, you're told to narrow down the scope of your research topic, that you must choose one particular path over another. And not a lot of people realize just how little 80,000 words is. It seems like a lot when you start, but once you get to the end, it's actually a very few words. My personal experience was that I was told my original research focus was too big. It was like I was trying to write a tome of books instead of a PhD thesis. So I think people will have to make difficult choices about which path they take with their thesis, and mustn't be disheartened when they're told that the plan they've started with is just too big.
That's usually like a very daunting stage to be at, but it's also very exciting.
Things quickly turn around and I switch into what I call perseverance and resilience mode, because that's what I needed to move forward, without which I would probably have quitted.
I started the PhD journey wanting to do the abandonment of everything, but I ended up having to choose one particular one. So I chose land, but I did put a bit of a mining law spin on it, with the focus of the rights of landowners in the context of mining. But now we've got another PhD student at the chair who's doing the electronic waste angle. So it was nice to see someone else kind of pick up the torch in that regard.
So you're having a bit of a legacy feeling there, that you've left a legacy that somebody else can work on. Now, Henri, I remember you also started out with a particular idea, and as your years of PhD study progressed, your ideas were also focused and narrowed, and that is something that I think many people it's something that people should be experiencing. But that happens along with other things happening in your life. And I think your big achievement was finishing your doctoral thesis and giving birth to your firstborn in the very same week.
It's important to remember that life still happens while you're busy with your thesis. It all depends on where in your life you are, obviously. Some of you are still very young, but it still means that there are other things going on in your life. And some of you might already have responsibilities towards family and things like that. But for me personally, I received my feedback on my first complete draft from Henry a week before my son was born. And I knew what I had to do to finish it up, but I just didn't have the energy to do it. And then I think about 2 months later, so he was about 2 months old, I realized, okay, I now have 3 conceptual chapters. The work has been done, but there's some restructuring that's required. And I was tired because you don't sleep. And I mean, concentrating was not that easy. And at some point it felt like, am I doing this from the beginning? Is this reinventing the wheel, redoing my own thesis?
Well, you must have done something right in those months of insomnia, Henri, because I remember when your examiner's reports came back, there were only 2 changes required. And the one was that you had to use the same word for a particular term throughout. So that was really a cosmetic change. And the other one, I can't even remember what that was, but that was also something that was fixable within a few minutes. Bernard, I would like you to tell us your story and tell us what you learned about yourself during the PhD.
It's a very long story, but I will make it short for the sake of time. My second daughter was born just, I think, 4 months after I started my PhD, and just when I was struggling with even putting together a proposal. And the worst thing is that she was born with health complications. So I had to struggle with this thesis. I'm still trying to understand what I should be doing. And on the other side, I have a child with special needs I have to attend to, not even knowing if in the next 1 month or the next 2 months, that child will still be alive. And I so desperately wanted to see her stay alive. Sometimes people ask me during those challenging times, what kept you going? And I always say the passion, the desire to go get this thing. It was challenging, but just the fact that I had 2 supervisors who believed in my dream. I always told myself, for them to accept the supervision means they saw something good in me. For UCT to even give me admission means they saw something good in my topic. It's up to me to bring that out. So that kept me going. And of course, I told myself, if I don't complete the research just because of the challenges I'm going through, I don't think it was going to change anything. So rather, I thought by completing it, it would change a whole lot of things for me. And I believe it did, because I feel very fulfilled at the moment. For the first 3 years of my thesis, I was really only in perseverance and resilience mode. And by the time I got through those 3 years, I started understanding about 90% what a PhD is. So I felt like I've started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And then, good for me also, my daughter had remarkably recovered so much, where compared to when she was born, doctors couldn't even guarantee that she would be around by her next birthday. 3 years down the line, she was doing very good. And that became a boost for me, which it really kept me going.
That is a wonderful story. And I was looking at the faces of everyone who knows what you've been through, Bernard, and the love and support that you see there is really, really special. Richard, perhaps you could tell us about the strange and unknown places that your thesis took you.
The PhD journey will give you opportunities to go places, not just in terms of research, but also through travel. I got the opportunity to spend 4 months at the University of Zurich through a contact I made through Henry. I also had an opportunity through another connection I made through Henry to spend a few weeks at the University of Aberdeen. I think it's important to take those opportunities when they arise, but also go out and make those opportunities for yourself to go to the strange and unfamiliar places.
I was so fortunate to be in the Milia family and have all of those opportunities there to travel with the team to like certain countries like Kenya. I met people outside of the Milia community, and with those people I explored other opportunities. And I think that's part of the reason why I ended up studying at Oxford afterwards, because they were people that were also pursuing the same thing.
Willingness and openness to be, to go out of your comfort zone and to be stretched in ways that you didn't expect before. Now that might not always be very comfortable. Louis, I'm sure you can tell us about some of the uncomfortable places that your thesis took you to.
When I started my PhD, people would often warn me about how lonely the PhD journey would be. At first, I didn't quite understand what they meant, and I also didn't really think that it would apply to me because I have a very loving family who was very supportive of my studies. So I didn't really think it was relevant. But as the journey progressed, and I did start to understand what they meant. No matter how loving or supportive your friends and family are, they don't really understand what it is that you are going through. And there's no real way that you can explain it to someone who hasn't gone through that journey before. And also from a practical perspective, you become somewhat isolated because you are forced to refuse and decline many social invitations. You spend your evenings and your weekends in front of your computer. So you miss a lot of the big celebrations, but also just everyday family events, and that can become quite lonely at times. So what I found tremendous comfort in was this Milia group, our group of students. I had a very close connection and still have a very close connection to people who are going through the same journey. So it's people who understand what it is that you are going through. And in the Milia group, every week we got together for an hour, either in person or online, and we would discuss someone's research and the progress that they've made. And even though the focus might not be on your work in any particular week, you soon learn that other people are struggling with the same issues. So that makes you feel less lonely and less isolated, where you get to learn that other people are focusing on the same struggles. They are suffering through the same struggles and have to deal with the same issues, but that you also have a network of students who can celebrate the small victories with you, and that really helped.
Indeed, you have a very loving family, and you also have a loving second family in the group of people that you met at Milia. And it's interesting to hear how a part of the journey is lonely. I suppose it is also always going to be lonely because even at some point, even you even surpass your supervisor. You go beyond what your supervisor knows, and you have a part of the road you have to walk alone. But luckily, there were fellow travelers. God knows, what was the thing that carried you through your thesis?
I was at Kramer almost every day, and the corridors, I would bump into everyone. And at the chair, I would bounce ideas back and forth. It's amazing how other people actually know about the area that you're writing in. It helped me a lot to be on campus. I must be honest, for me, it was I don't want to use the word breeze, but I had a different experience altogether. Just starting from the supervision part of things, I had two supervisors, you and Dr. Fergus, and there was this synergy, it was almost as if, the comments, one would come from the mining angle and the other from labor perspective, and everything just came together. But in addition to all that, it was also the holistic approach of the chair to a PhD. You are not just there to write a thesis, organize conferences, write and publish, start some teaching. How do you navigate in all that? So I think it was the entire experience, and those were my perspectives and my experiences.
You mentioned two things. The one is a positive mindset. And I really believe that a positive mindset can carry you through a lot, including the slumps that one experiences from time to time when you are told your thesis topic is too broad, or that that the chapter is not yet ready, that you have to go back to the drawing board. Positivity really helps for that. But the other thing that you mentioned is showing up for your thesis day by day. And I think that is a really important takeaway from the whole experience, is if you're writing a thesis, you should be writing that day by day, every day, not in bursts, which is so tempting.
My advice to students who is starting off on this path is to build a network with others who are in the same boat as you. So whether that is students in the same cohort that's starting this year, or maybe other students that's working on a similar topic or under the same supervisor, or however you want to build that connection, is to connect with other students on a regular basis and discuss what you are going through and discuss what you are struggling with, but also to share the good experiences and the milestones.
I think it's important while you're on the PhD journey to take opportunities to travel for research. It's probably not going to be possible in the immediate future, but it's important to keep it in mind and apply for opportunities as they arise. You should make connections with people who may be able to facilitate travel for study purposes.
One of the most important things that you must look at and you must guard jealously is your relationship with your supervisor. It's one of the best things that can make your experience the best experience or like a difficult experience. So make sure that you are in sync with your supervisor. I think more than anything else, that is a ticket.
Just keep at it. I think even if your pace slows down a bit, because that's what happened for me. Obviously, I wanted to finish up a bit sooner. Even if your pace slows down, don't worry too much about it. Just keep at it. Just keep doing something. Just keep writing.
Writing articles actually benefited me so much. While I was studying, I was like, oh my goodness, why do I have to write additional articles? But that benefited me so much, because now that I'm doing my MBA, I'm always told, oh, your problem solving skills are like so advanced. And I think I can trace that back to, writing articles that were outside of the scope of my own research. And I'm so grateful for that. I would really encourage people to seek out opportunities like that.
Carve out a little piece for your thesis every day. And I'm sure, especially if you're working full-time, that is going to be very difficult on many days. But I think that discipline is very important. And even if you don't have the mental capacity to do something groundbreaking on that day, even if you just work on 2 footnotes for that day, but never let your thesis lie silent for weeks on end. I think that would be a mistake.
Don't compare yourself too much with how other people are approaching their studies. I think the one thing, if you do not yet know it well, you will learn it well while doing the PhD, is how you work best. If you have to go for a run, then you have to go for a run. If you have to social with friends, then you have to do it. So, but I think it's important just to acknowledge that you might do it differently than other people.
Keep the momentum going. But if it gets too tough, say if you find yourself in emotional breakdown situations, or let's say when the going gets too tough and you feel like you are choking, give it a little break. Don't mind about the person you started with, who already has 3 or 4 chapters. Give it a break, recover, because your health is much more important. That's what I wanted to add.
The importance of self-care is the message that comes out of this. Self-care and showing up for your thesis. I would like to thank all of you for giving your time. I am sure you will all join me in wishing this new cohort well on their way forward, and we're hoping for many happy writing days and many happy graduations at the end of it. Thank you again all for contributing, and thank you for everybody who came to listen.